Good afternoon. Is this on? Can you hear me clearly? There we go. I can hear myself now too. Thank you everybody for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. This is actually the exact same room, I believe, that I delivered a lecture in the last time I came to George Fox. That was in Paul Anderson's class. Feel good to be here. Today we'll be speaking on this topic of being a Muslim in America or living as a Muslim in the United States these days. I know last week you had a lot of information in regards to the history of Islam in America, and it's a very complex history, so it required a lot of information. But now we'll take a more contemporary look at the life of a Muslim in the United States these days. I want to start just a little bit about myself. I'd like to introduce myself. That usually reduces the possibility of people not liking me, or maybe increases, for all I know. How do I know? I'm a Muslim American, born Muslim, born American. I was born in Chicago, raised in the Bay Area in California before coming up here about 25 years ago. So for all intents and purposes, I'm a localer. But it is why I'm a 49er fan. If anybody else is good, all right. And a Laker fan. Yeah. Hey, all right, okay. I thought I'd make more enemies than friends there. But I also love my Blazers. Everything I do in the Muslim community, so I serve as a national spokesperson for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. It's one of the oldest Muslim organizations in America, established back in 1920. And as the national spokesperson, I appear on the news, like you've just seen some clips of, to address some of these topics of Islam in America or Islamic topics that are going around the world. As well as deliver lectures like this. And so I appreciate this opportunity. But everything I do is, it's volunteer-based. It's not my full-time job. My day job, I work for Nike at their world headquarters in Beaverton. And I work for the specifically organization called Nike ID, where you can customize your own shoe on NikeID.com. That's my little plug for NikeID.com. I won't mention NikeID.com anymore. It's the last mention of NikeID.com. So, I have 3 wonderful children. They're the ones that got some cake frosting on me right before I left. They're almost 5, 2 years old, and then 8-month-old. So keeps me busy all throughout. But enough of the boring stuff. Let's now learn about you. This is helpful for me, just to get to know a little bit about you. I realize there's a lot of people here, so we won't go person by person. But if anybody would like to just maybe raise their hand and offer what their experience has been, maybe they have a Muslim friend. Maybe if you even want to say, all I know about Islam is what I see in the news, that's fine. But who would be willing to just give me a little introduction into what your exposure or your level of understanding is about Islam or Muslims in America? Yes, ma'am. Oh, wow. Okay. Cuisine is usually very important. And even local Muslims, or were they all the refugees? Okay. Oh, very good. Oh, is that right? Okay. That's a whole different dynamic then. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Usually the first is the toughest. Okay, yes. Hmm. Oh, wow. Deeply ingrained in Muslim culture. Excellent. Okay. Somebody had their hand up down here. Anybody else want? Oh, yes, sorry. Is that right? Oh, wow. That's very honest. Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. That's very honest. I like that. Okay. Hopefully at the end of this you could say you have 10 Muslim friends. Or 9. 9 speakers? 8 speakers? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, a handful. And my email address is up there too. Not just for friendship purposes. But post-lecture, any questions anybody has, please do jot down my email. I'd be more than happy to address them. Okay, so this is helpful. Thank you. The greatest thing is just knowing and interfacing with a Muslim. One of the things I always think about is, I'm not sure how many people heard about this, but a couple of years ago, perhaps last year, a gentleman, an Iraqi gentleman, decided that people don't know much about Iraqis, and he wanted to resolve this issue. So he took one of those lemonade stands on the road, and he just went around the country and just parked it in random parks, and the sign said, "Meet an Iraqi." That's it, just meet an Iraqi. And he sat there on a stool, just sat there. And people just came up to him and started talking to him. And the vast majority had never met an Iraqi face to face. So they had some interesting questions about, do you have swimming pools in Iraq, and then also asking political questions. So why are you guys like this? Why do you hate America? And so it became a very profound experience that I think was documented by some news station. But the underlying concept is, you can't really understand someone if you've never met them. It's hard for me to understand a Jewish individual if I've never met a Jew. How could I understand Judaism if everything I'm learning about Judaism is at my mosque, for example? That's not very fair. Why should a Muslim tell me what Jews believe? It's only fair for me to learn that from somebody who practices that faith. So that's why things like this are very important. I thought I'd start with talking about growing up in the United States. So growing up as a Muslim in America, being Muslim meant very simple things to me. I couldn't lie. I had to be honest, trustworthy, and I had to have a lot of integrity. I had to treat my parents with respect. I had to treat others with respect, especially those that are elder or teachers or professors, anyone older than me. I had to go to the mosque every Friday for prayer services and every Sunday for our educational classes. I had to be incredibly hardworking. That's the best image I could find for that. I couldn't drink alcohol, I couldn't eat pork, and I couldn't gamble. So growing up as a teenager and preteen, this is really what it all boiled down to in simple terms. This is what my life was like as a Muslim in America. I lived by these rules and everything was fine. But being a Muslim in America is more than that. And for me, when I went to college, when I left high school and I went to University of Oregon, hope there's no Beaver fans here that has made enemies. But when I went to University of Oregon, that's where I started challenging my faith. I started asking a lot of fundamental questions of what does it mean to be a Muslim? Why do I even believe in Islam? Started taking a lot of courses down there about Christianity, even taking philosophy courses. Befriended a professor of theology and started studying different faith practices. The end of the road for me was that I felt reconnected with Islam. There could be some bias there because I was born into the faith, but for me, at the end of my 4 years, I came away with a renewed vigor, a renewed admiration and love and respect for this faith, as well as other people's faiths as well. But this is what started my path as truly living the life of a Muslim in America. And I understood that people oversimplified what it meant to be a Muslim in America. Muslims in the United States are ethnically diverse. You may not even know a Muslim if you see him in the streets, him or her, because we take different shapes and sizes, different ethnic backgrounds. These are just a small selection of Muslims. So they're ranging from white, black, Asian, brown, East Asian. This is actually my brother-in-law. He probably doesn't know I'm showing him in front of a couple hundred people right now. There's Japanese Americans, there's Chinese Americans, there's Latino, there's South American. Muslims are really of all ethnicities. And so when people talk about the Muslim perspective or the Muslim bloc, they're really oversimplifying, making a monolith out of a very ethnically diverse group. Professionally even, we're professors, lawyers, doctors, actors, pharmacists, software developers, nurses, farmers, musicians, poets, writers, businessmen and women, high school football coaches, police officers, entrepreneurs, mechanics, electricians, and even politicians. We have 2 members of Congress in the U.S. Congress who are Muslim. And so the life of a Muslim is really the same as the life of a non-Muslim in America. You'll find Muslims not only of any ethnic variety, but also of even professional background. Muslims are American through and through. And this the way we've always identified ourselves as well, has been American. And everything seemed to be going fine. And then some things changed 11 years ago when 9/11 occurred. On that day, little did I know at that point how significant of a change and long-lasting of a change that would have in my life, even to personalize it, as well as the life of many others. I was 22 years old at the time. You can do the math to see how old I am. And I was woken up by my mother in a frantic hurry, trying to explain to me what just happened. Turn on the TV just in time to see the second building crumble. And that time, it was just more of shock of what just happened, trying to make sense of it. But afterwards, when we started realizing just how fundamental of an event this really was, as the day went on and the death count went higher, and then the names started coming out. You know, Osama bin Laden, his picture started showing out on the screen. Al Qaeda, Taliban, all of these names started coming on the screen, and that's when Muslims started to say that they need to brace themselves for a possible backlash. And unfortunately, that is kind of what we saw. And the immediate response was a negative. There was anger across the country towards Muslims and towards Islam. There were claims that Muslims don't fit here in the society, that Islam is foreign, it's at odds with the Constitution and our freedoms. Mosques were attacked, and the very next day after 9/11, Texas and Virginia had experienced some vandalism at mosques. Even the very next day after 9/11, 300 protesters marched to try to go into, to march into a mosque in Illinois, in a suburb of Illinois, but they were stopped. Muslim women were harassed for covering their heads, and one example I mentioned, there was a Harvard grad student who, which became kind of a famous case. It was, I think, within the first 1 or 2 weeks after 9/11, that while she was walking on campus, two gentlemen started harassing her, telling her to go back where she came from and trying to pull off her head covering, her scarf. There was, and the very first fatality that was faced was actually a Sikh man. So not sure how much you know about the Sikh faith, but they have turbans, they have beards, and it's a totally different religion from Islam or Hinduism, but they faced a grunt, a large grunt of the backlash. And the very first first individual to actually be murdered as a response to 9/11 was a Sikh man in Arizona who was gunned down while working in his store. So this is what we started seeing, and so Muslims around the country started getting on edge. Suddenly, women who always had their headscarves on stopped wearing the headscarves when they went out. Muslims who had beards for years suddenly shaved it off. For us back then, being younger, it was kind of comical because we saw men who, it was clear that their skin had never seen the light of day in years, suddenly being exposed and being this ashy gray. And but we're trying to make fun out of it, but it was a serious issue. They didn't want to be identified as Muslims when they went out. Here locally, we experienced a slightly different reaction. We did receive at our mosque, the Portland Rizwan Mosque, some threatening phone calls, and we were concerned that would happen because it's the oldest mosque ever built in Portland, and so we could be a target. But we really received a few threatening calls, go back where he came from, blaming us for 9/11. But we received literally over 200 calls of support. So much so, is pre-voicemail days, we actually bought an extra answering machine because we didn't want to erase it. It was so touching. Over 200 calls from people that are complete strangers saying, we know you have nothing to do with it. If you're afraid of doing shopping, let us know. We'll do shopping for you. One gentleman who was a security guard at Lloyd Center who offered to do security at our mosque for free if we felt like there's going to be some attack. And we graciously declined all those offers. But it was very touching. And at the end, we did do a thank you dinner for all of them. We invited them to the mosque and had a conversation. But so we were very lucky, because I think people here in this part of the country are very open-minded. But across the country, there were mixed reactions. Of course, in Ohio, when a gentleman drove his car right into a mosque, into the building. And so Since then, the dynamic has changed. There's people that are very sensitive, and there's those people that are trying to overcome this. Then there was a positive, which was about a few months after 9/11, the positives started appearing, which were, for example, the interfaith groups. Many new interfaith groups were developed as a result of 9/11. Here in Portland, the Interfaith Council of Greater Portland, the Institute of Christian Muslim Understanding. These groups were never existed pre 9/11, but after 9/11, they formed as a response to try to focus on the commonalities between people of different faiths. So that was great. And so in that period, a few years after 9/11, really felt like we as a nation were probably the most united we've ever been. Everyone was patriotic. I know my parents, being immigrants to this country, shocked us suddenly, the three of us kids, when they hung a U.S. flag outside the house. And we're like, wow, that was, the three of us felt like we're Americans. We're born and raised here. But for my parents to do that as immigrants, that said something to us. They even felt like we as a nation were attacked. So I felt like we were all very united and things were going great. And even for us, the number of lectures that we were asked to deliver skyrocketed. I think in the first 6 months after 9/11, we had spoken in front of somewhere around 10,000 people around Portland because so many people want to come to the mosque, learn what Islam's all about. They're inviting us to come to their universities, colleges, Rotary clubs, etc., even at church groups to speak about this. Then when it comes to the religious dialogue, that was an interesting dynamic that I experienced. Before 9/11, I felt like we were able to have a lot of very deep, meaningful, spiritual dialogue whenever we'd have interfaith groups or talk to people about religion. We'd talk about what is the notion of God, the afterlife, what is heaven and hell, what happens to your soul, what's the concept of soul, what is a soul, prophethood. We'd talk about some very deep and having some very deep, long-lasting conversations. After 9/11, it seemed like nobody really wanted to talk about that. People didn't ask us what our concept of God was or what we thought of angels or the afterlife. Foremost on people's mind were topics like terrorism, violence in Islam, jihad. What is this jihad I keep hearing about on television? The oppression of women. And then as of late, over the last couple of years, this term Sharia or Islamic law. What is that? Are you really trying to take over our constitution with your Islamic law? And within that comes topics like apostasy, blasphemy, free speech issues. And so these are the things that since 9/11, regularly we are approached to talk about. And I don't complain about that. It was a necessity. I understood and I sympathized with the need and the interest that people had of wanting to talk about this. But there was a notable difference in what people wanted to talk to us about. By the way, as we go along, if you have questions, pressing questions, you don't want to wait to the end, feel free to raise your hand. We can certainly address them as we go. Yes? Yes, moved to Portland in 1984. So it's been, 28 years now? So I think I'm a localer now. I think I'm a local Oregonian, a native. Am I a native? So this was these were the good years after 9/11. The first several years, there was the apprehension, there was the antagonism, the occasional antagonism, but I truly felt like we were doing great as a nation. We were very unified. I think we all were identifying each other as Americans. Nobody was really that quick to judge Muslims based off of what they saw happening in the Middle East. But then it changed. The discourse changed when confrontation started happening. A few years after 9/11, the discourse began to shift. There's an increasingly number of people that are becoming antagonistic against Muslims, against Islam. Geert Wilders being one of the foremost antagonists, mosques being vandalized, and protests all across the country. Stop Islam, all I need to know about Islam, I learned 9/11. Of course, a Gainesville, Florida pastor and his sign outside his church. This repeated accusation that Obama's a Muslim. This concept that America is being Islamicized, so stop the Islamization of America, telling Americans to wake up, that Muslims are sneaking in and taking over. Referring to the mosque the Islamic Center / mosque that was trying to be built in Lower Manhattan. that got coined as the Ground Zero Mosque, not by mistake, but to instill this fear that they're trying to build a mosque on the graves of our fallen victims. And then people start referring to it as the Obama Mosque sometimes as well, thereby continue this conflation of Obama being a Muslim. No more mosques in America. This drawing the word Sharia like it's blood-soaked, and instilling this fear that this concept of Sharia is something to be truly feared, stop it from spreading. I could go on, but this is where the discourse changed. And I would guess my gut feel is something happened around 2005, 2006. I'm not exactly sure what. Maybe it was the war in Afghanistan that kept spiraling out of control. The antagonism with Iraq. Something occurred in which the discourse changed. And since then, till now, there's a lot more antagonism, there's a lot more confrontation. No longer were people being as careful to judge all Muslims by the actions of the lunatic fringe. Yes, ma'am. No, I was just surmising. It was around the same time. I really have not yet come up with a theory of why. But around the 2005, 2006 time is when I really felt that a shift was occurring. And then some things definitely propelled it. For example, that mosque or Islamic center that was trying to be built in Lower Manhattan, that definitely instigated, it was a catalyst and made things a lot worse. But more things happened. The Murfreesboro, Tennessee mosque that was trying to be built, the vandalism they faced, and since then, the spree of attacks or vandalism at not just mosques, but even Sikh temples, gurdwaras, that are attacked, and then has graffiti on there about anti-Islamic slurs, even though they're not even Muslim. So we've seen this in heightened occurrence of such things happening. But this confrontation then came from both sides. We saw images such as these, the repeated instances of violence, murder, threats from Muslim individuals and groups. Now, these are not necessarily in America, but they affect the lives of Muslims in America. Actually, the one on the left, I know for sure is London. I think the one on the right was London as well. But these are the images that we started seeing in the news, and they're not manufactured. I can't blame Fox News. I can't blame CNN for these because they're not creating them. These aren't actors, as far as I know. I'm sure there's conspiracy theorists out there, but I don't believe they're actors. If these Muslims weren't acting this way, then they wouldn't have any images to show. But this threat, Islam is going to dominate the world. Slay those that insult Islam. Europe, you'll pay for demolition. Oh, you will pay. Demolition is on its way. Destruction is on its way. All these threats for things to come. Flags being burned, even Obama effigies being burned. So we started seeing antagonism on both sides, and here we are as Muslims, seemingly stuck in the middle as Muslim Americans. So feel a strong allegiance to my faith, which I love truly to my core. And I feel strong allegiance to my country because I can't imagine living anywhere else. And I see people on both sides just attacking each other. So the dynamic of a Muslim American or American Muslim was quite profound because now you're in the middle being pulled by both sides and even pushed away by both sides. It's almost like a person with no home. When I would go visit family in Pakistan, oftentimes, or even in London, some friends, I'd often somehow became the spokesperson for the United States and have to sit there while they're saying, oh, you guys did this, you guys did that. And I say, hey, I didn't do anything. But because you're an American, suddenly you were seen as the aggressor. And it goes to this question of, why do people hate America? Which I think is a flawed question. I don't think people hate America. I think, if anything, people hate American foreign policy. I think people hate the way the government has done things. And we could talk about what those are, but I'm pretty sure that Abdul Rahim covered that last week in his discourse about things that happened from the 1950s onward. But for us, You saw Muslim Americans trying. Now they were put in a situation where we felt like Muslims in the United States were expected to represent all of Islam. And many Muslims complain about that. Hey, I'm just a regular guy. Why do I have to represent Islam? But often it seemed like we were put in a place where we had to condemn anything that happened around the world. If there was an attack in Afghanistan, or there was an attack in Israel, in Iraq, an attempted attack in the United States, that silence indicated acceptance. And that's the situation we find ourselves in today, which is ridiculous. No one person should be held accountable for another person, even if they belong to the same quote-unquote group. It would be absurd for anyone to expect every Jew in America to have to answer for those cases of Israeli aggression in the occupied territories. That'd be ludicrous. You can't expect them to answer for someone who's thousands of miles away. But this is the situation we found ourselves in. And this is how people started responding. They started taking active stances, protests, peaceful protests, asking for tolerance, declaring their allegiance to both the United States as well as to Islam. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this television series that occurred last year on TLC called All American Muslim, in which they follow the lives of, I'm not sure how many Muslims there were or how many families. I think it's maybe 4 or 5 families in the Dearborn, Michigan area, and just kind of chronicled their lives. And one was a high school football coach, one was in law enforcement, one lady wanted to open a dance club. Others were having a child pretty soon. They're talking about, showing the dynamic of one of the father being absolutely freaked out about having a child. And so it just showed that, hey, maybe they're not so different after all. But even to that, there were boycotts. There were calls to boycott that show because it's masking jihad. It's masking the true agenda of Islam. So this is probably one of the most frustrating things is to not be believed. When you're cast into a position where you're not to be trusted, then no matter how reasonable of a thing you may say is, people can say, oh, you're lying. And sometimes I pen articles for different publications, and sometimes I sit and I feel like this is the most reasonable, the most balanced call for human decency. There's no way anybody can find any fault in this. But then you publish it and you read the comment section, and it's just vile. The type of, I know there's a power of anonymity when you leave a comment online that you wouldn't do if you were face to face. But the type of remarks that are left there, you're left perplexed. Like, what do I need to do to convince people that I'm not a jihadi that's trying to kill everybody? But the accusation that you either are misinformed or you're lying. You don't know Islam. I know Islam. And let me tell you, it's all violent. So that's the situation we found ourselves in. And even though you saw activists around the country trying to spread this message that, hey, we're here as loyal citizens of this country, and there's nothing to fear of us. I started at 40, so I go until about 20, right? 25. Sorry, math was a little off. Then what added more complication were the attacks in the United States, or at least attempted attacks against the United States, mostly perpetrated by Americans, or at least American residents. November 2009, Major Nadal Malek, who opened fire at the Army base in Fort Hood, killing 13 people. December, the next month, early in December, 5 Virginia youth that were arrested in Pakistan, which is where my family's from, on charges of going there to get training to attack the United States. The same month, then what's been coined the underwear bomber, the Detroit bomber, who was arrested on a plane en route to the United States with a bomb on him. 2010 in May, 30-year-old Pakistani American Faswa Shahzad, who attempted to blow up a car in Times Square. That one was real difficult. This one hit me pretty close, not because I know the guy or anything, but when you read his description, he sounded an awful lot like me. A 30-year-old American of Pakistani descent, very well educated. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to. Educated. Let me tell you how great I am. Educated. Incredibly smooth. Ladies loved him. Don't let my wife see this video. Educated from a good family, educated family as well, who were from Pakistan. So it seemed there were a lot of correlations. And the question was, well, what happened to him? How did he turn? Whereas, people like myself and others didn't. There was, of course, the 2010, the Black Friday attempted bombing here in Portland. And that obviously hits close to home because that's in our own backyard. So these things perpetuated the problem. That made things worse. Of course, there was one more, the attempted bombing in Catonsville, Maryland. So this also contributed towards how things were getting worse. There was antagonism, there were protests in the Middle East against the United States and foreign policy. Here, people started spreading this fear of Islam, of Islamization of America, of mosques that are trying to be built as, some quote unquote conquering, or a form of conquering the United States. Then we had these attacks, which solidified their claim that, see, these Muslims aren't to be trusted. Look at all these examples of Muslim after Muslim after Muslim trying to attack the United States. So things got worse and worse. Now, we're always going to have the antagonists out there, like the Pamela Gellers of the world and the Robert Spencers of the world. Oops, I think I went one too far. Yeah. These are the cookie people. Like Pam Geller, who suggested, although she didn't explicitly say, she suggested that Barack Obama is the out-of-wedlock love child of Malcolm X. Said that Arabic is not a language, but a tool for anti-Americanism. You have Robert Spencer, who claimed that the decision by Campbell Soups to issue a line of halal soups for Muslims was the first step in the Islamic takeover of America. In that case, that one's true. That's how we're going to do it. Through soup, yeah. Soup is the way. But these people have always been there, and they will continue to be there. And they're funny. Like my friend Reza Aslan, he even says this, that you should laugh at them because they're clowns, and you're supposed to laugh at clowns. So he doesn't really engage with them anymore. But I find myself still engaging with them. I've had many Twitter battles with both of them. And our community's actually even issued an open challenge for a debate or a dialogue with them. Say, well, let's talk about it. We'll give you a platform, you talk about it, and we'll talk about our beliefs, and let's come to some sort of resolution. But they're often in the news, and so these people, to my friend Reza's point, you can't really worry about them because they will be there. But here's what's different. What's different are the Newt Gingriches of the world, the Mike Huckabees of the world, the Rick Santorums, the Michelle Bachmans. I'm not trying to isolate, call out the Republican Party. I'm actually a very unpolitical man, a religious man, not a political man. But this is a new dynamic that we have in the United States. Thought leaders, lawmakers, those that have very large areas of influence, espousing some of the most despicable, most bigoted remarks about Muslims. And they're in positions of leadership, of authority. Newt Gingrich declaring that Sharia, which is simply Islamic law, which is what we use to govern ourselves. I follow Sharia every day. I say Assalamu alaikum to people when I see them. That's Sharia. I wash my hands before eating. That's Sharia. I say prayers 5 times a day. That's according to Sharia. That's what Sharia is. But making statements like Sharia is a mortal threat to the survival of freedom in the United States and the world as we know it. It's a direct quote from Newt Gingrich. Bachman said, we surely must realize, sorry if this thing's sensitive, surely we must realize that Sharia would be against our Constitution because that would usurp and put Sharia law over the Constitution, and that would be wrong. Again, perpetuating this fear that this Sharia is this boogeyman that's going to take over the Constitution. Rick Santorum saying that unless Islam is willing to make conscious decision for democracy, then we are going to be at war for a very long time. He didn't say radical Islam, he said Islam. It could be a slip of the tongue, or it could not. But the result is people that are listening are saying, wow, yeah, you're making sense, and this is how it goes on and on. There's a vilification of an entire group of people. Another one, Santorum, saying equality doesn't come from Islam. It comes from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's where it comes from. Again, separating Muslims. They have a different God. Equality doesn't come from their God. Equality comes from our God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, which is ridiculous. It's preposterous. There's only one God. And I'm sure that was covered in the speech, the presentation about the basic tenets. We only believe in one God. It's the same God of Abraham, the same God of Jesus, the same God of Moses, same God of Muhammad. There's only ever been one God, and we've been declaring that belief for 1,400 years. But these days we have not just kooky, random people saying otherwise. You have thought leaders that actually have influence saying that. And of course, Mike Huckabee, who called Islam the antithesis to the gospel of Christ. Again, telling the message to Christians that Muslims are the antithesis to your belief. They're in a way declaring them, implying them to be the Antichrist. So this is where we find ourselves. And so this is the uphill battle that we have to fight as Muslims in America. We're still in the middle. We have to condemn any violence and terrorism that occurs, especially in the name of Islam, because people expect that. And if we don't, then we're silently accepting the fact that this is Islam. At the same time, we're attacking the other side by our own people, our own countrymen, our own Americans, as being not American enough. That's a feeling that that many Muslims get, that well, no matter what we do, no matter how many generations we've been here, we're simply not American enough to be here. When people say that this is a Christian nation, and therefore we must have a Christian president, it's telling all of us that, we're just not American enough to be president someday. It's a very slippery slope to start making that argument. And but we also know that this has happened to other people. There have been many other groups in the United States that have been vilified and isolated like this. Almost everything that's been said about Muslims has been said about Catholics in this country, have been said about African Americans in this country, have been said about Jews in this country, and to a certain extent even said about Quakers in this country. That they're different, their loyalties can't be trusted. So in a way, a friend of mine once said this, but it's kind of what we do in this country, unfortunately, is to identify who we are as Americans by being a polar opposite of someone else who isn't American enough. And I think just right now, the Muslims we have our turn. But I believe that over the course of a couple of decades, perhaps, when we look back, I think we'll look at these bigots with the same derision, at the same mockery as we look at the anti-Semitic bigots from the 19th century, as well as the anti-Catholic movement from earlier, that we'll look at them with the same derision. But so now, how do we respond to this? I can at least speak for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We've been trying to put our faith into action for a few years now, and this is how we do it. It's not necessarily a PR campaign, but how we respond is educational initiatives. What we've called initially Muslims for Peace. That happened immediately after the attempted bombing in Times Square from Fasfar Shahzad. Yes, ma'am. Well, I'm not wishing for derision or mockery. What I'm predicting is that the same mockery that we use when we refer to the early history of America and the anti-Semitic bigots of that time, people mock them now. That can you believe they actually did that? I think that's what will happen with the current day anti-Islamic movement in a couple of decades. I'm not wishing for it. I'm saying that the history of the United States leads me to believe that though we have our turn right now, we're facing a lot of antagonism, that those same antagonists, who I believe are very unreasonable, will face that same place in history as the previous bigots have against other groups. That's my thought, is that they will inevitably face that same place in history. Certainly, the dictates of humanity will compel me not to wish for any derision on anyone. But what I'm saying is just simply the pattern throughout history. I believe that, and that's what kind of rests my concern. So we don't get too hung up on why Muslims. We don't take this victimology approach. We know that this is happening, we'll deal with it, and having faith in God, we know it will pass. But the Muslims for Peace campaign, it was an educational grassroots campaign we started in the summer of 2010 after that failed attempt in Times Square, in which it was our response to where are the moderate Muslims. And it was grassroots. It really took shape of a simple flyer that we took, and across the country, we had thousands of Muslims that just walked the streets and handed them to fellow Americans and whoever wanted it, and just had a conversation with them. So what does that mean, Muslims for Peace? We opened the flyer up, had a small quote from the Quran, that whoever kills one person, it shall be as if they had killed all of mankind. We should have continued that quote, actually. The rest of the quote from the Quran says, whoever saves one life, it's as if they had saved all of mankind. So, I mean, this concept of the sanctity of human life is highly emphasized in the Quran, so we want to educate people on that. And here we are, that we didn't want to just stay at home in the comfort of our homes and say we're peaceful, that we were getting out of our comfort zone and taking in what I call an active stand for peace. And so we did that nationwide. Then the next one was Muslims for Loyalty, to stress this concept that Muslims are required by their faith to be loyal to the country in which they reside. The Prophet Muhammad was quoted as saying that love of one's country, and he was clear about his love of one's country of residence is a part of your faith. So that loyalty, you shouldn't feel this conflict of being a Muslim and being a resident of a country. And then this image didn't really come out very clear, but what it says is Muslims for Life. And this is now our annual campaign or annual initiative we do every year that just ended this month to commemorate the memory of 9/11 victims. So to honor the victims of 9/11, we dedicate to collect blood. So throughout the country, we organize blood drives to collect, and our target's always 11,000 bags of blood. Because on 9/11, we lost 3,000 American lives. But if you collect 11,000 bags of blood, according to the Red Cross, that can save up to 33,000 American lives. So 11 times the number of people that were killed, those how many lives you can save by collecting this blood. So this is how we respond, is by giving our blood to save American lives. So this is how we put our faith into action to show that we are loyal to this country. We're here for the long haul. We're not trying to take over, and we're trying to actually serve our fellow man. And what I close with is a description of why. Why do we do this? Now, our community, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, it's not just in the United States, it's a worldwide community. We're firmly established in over 200 countries around the world. And we're all united under one Khalifa, or Caliph. He's a worldwide spiritual leader. And if it helps, you can kind of think of it similar in a way to the Pope. But what his role is really he provides a spiritual guidance. And whenever anything happens in the world, it's him that we turn to for guidance. And here's what he had to say to us, which instigated us to formulate those campaigns. He said, a true Muslim can never raise his voice in hatred against his fellow citizens, nor for that matter, against the ruling authority or government of the time. He should remain loyal and fully abide by the laws of the land of which he is a subject. So what I want is what everybody else wants. Peace, security, a good job, safe neighborhood. What binds us as countrymen and countrywomen is the same. We all want the same things. And I think going forward, that's our vision. That's our approach, is to understand that we are different in our faith. Let's talk about our differences. We don't have to pretend like we're all the same. There's a reason why people are not Muslim, because there's some things they disagree with about the theology of Islam. There's a reason I'm not Christian. There's some things I disagree with on the theology of Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism. There's a reason we are who we are. Let's talk about that. We should highlight the differences in a respectful manner to understand one another, not use it to vilify one another that you're not good enough. So this is what we're aiming for, and using this as a way to ensure freedom of religion, or even freedom from religion, so they can practice as they see fit.